There's a question here. It says, in San Francisco, 4 innocent Americans have been murdered because of the city's sanctuary city policy. How would you explain your support for sanctuary cities to their grieving loved ones? First, I would say it's a misstatement to say that sanctuary city policy enables murder. So wherever the question came from, the policies don't facilitate this. People will commit criminal acts regardless of whether there's a policy to create a safe harbor for anyone. We had sanctuary cities before we actually had to call them sanctuary cities. We didn't call it that, but we had to create more laws to actually fill holes, if you will, in our ordinances so that it would protect immigrants and offer civil rights protections to persons who were living in our cities already. The unfortunate and tragic incidences that might have occurred in San Francisco or any other city is not related to sanctuary city policy. But I understand the sentiment for what you're saying, and I just don't think it's relevant to the policy, whatsoever.
A comment from you.
A lot of immigration policy studies suggest that if you were to take the undocumented population as its own country, 12 million people, and look at the crime rate, they are well below the national average. So the concept of focusing on surveillance, focusing massive resources like $40 billion of Department of Homeland Security, I say, on a population that is generally less dangerous than the rest, seem to be often seen as overkill. Just symbolic punishment and creating a climate of fear. It's not all these measures of going after spectacular ICE raids that really terrify families seem to have the effect not of preventing crime, but really of scaring immigrants, right? So you have to look at it as a political case. The state can never take decision on the basis only of the family of victims, right? The state is supposed to act neutrally, looking at all the parts of the equation. It cannot be moved by vengeance, right? So that is an ancient concept that comes also from medieval law. The idea of sanctuaries in medieval law in Europe was that any place, medieval Europe was ravaged by wars, so the idea that there are places where these kind of politics of vengeance cannot take place. And this is kind of an extension of that in the 21st century. We can discuss forever if we agree or not on it, but those are the foundations of it.
So I have a question. I think, Sarah, perhaps you can answer this. What's the difference between a refugee and an asylee? If you could clarify that, I think would be very helpful.
Well, both refugees and asylees are people who fear persecution in their home country on account of a protected ground, and the protected grounds are political opinion, race, religion, nationality, and membership in a particular social group. Refugees get their status of refugees outside the country, so they get processed outside the country by UN headquarters for refugee, by American consular officers abroad, and they enter the United States as refugees. Asylees enter the United States without that status and then have to apply for it and establish that they qualify once they're here.
I have a question for Veronica. To what extent has San Francisco Commission for Human Rights worked with other cities and other communities to try and implement some of your practices in San Francisco?
Great question. So we have partnerships with a number of different counties in the Bay Area. Our executive director, Cheryl Davis, is also in the process of kind of expanding those connections nationally. We've been working with the University of Rutgers to also think about implementation and, you know, duplicating or replicating the work that we've been doing with young people or, you know, around community conversations, et cetera. And so I think that that's definitely something that we're working on. I know we have the My Brother Sisters Keeper out of our office, and so that has really offered us a partnership with Policy Link and a number of other organizations.
Yes, I have a question, I think for Sarah, which is to do with cancellation of the immigration policies. I'll let you read the question.
Yeah, so the question asks really about how the cancellation of the designation of temporary protected status for certain countries that has occurred recently will affect the people who have this status. And so temporary protected status is just that. It's a status that is temporary, designated by Congress for people when there has been an upheaval in their home country that makes it dangerous or difficult for them to return. So, for example, after the Haitian earthquake of 2012, that Haiti was designated, Haitians who were here were allowed to apply for temporary protected status. Recently, 2 countries have been de-designated, and this is Sudan and then Nicaragua yesterday. And so these, Sudan has been a country with the designation for, I believe, 20 years. Nicaragua was designated as a TPS country in 1999, following Hurricane Mitch. So many of these people have been here with a legal status that lets them stay and work and renew it for quite a long time. They may have spouses and U.S. citizen-born children. In some cases, they may have spent more time in the United States than they did in their home countries. So the question is that this is what these people can do. It depends. It depends on their personal situation, and I would urge everybody who is who has TPS and who is subject to expiration to come in and get legal counsel, because there may be a way to get to that permanent resident status. There may be something else you can do.
This question, I think, is for any of the panelists who want to weigh in on it. What do you think will be the grand bargain that Trump has struck with the Democrats as far as DACA is concerned? When the Congress, he's punted it to the Congress to act on it. Will it be a path to citizenship? Will it be support for the wall? Where do you think the future of the DACA program, what sort of trade-offs do you think will be faced by the Congress in terms of what the administration wants? Anybody want to weigh in on that?
We don't know yet. There's a lot of stuff that has been floating around. We are very interested to know that ourselves. I think, you know, obviously the president has been advocating for stronger border and interior enforcement. He's been advocating for a border wall. So those are some of the things that he has been asking for. What I would say is the Democratic Party in Congress and in the Senate, so House and Senate, are not willing to cave on a couple of those issues. And it's sadly, it's also tied to our budget reauthorization. So our continuing resolution ends on December 8th. The debt ceiling's on December 8th. And there's a lot of things that need to be worked out politically that our country absolutely needs a deal on. And so right now, what we're hearing from our lobbyists out in DC is that we are probably heading to another continuing resolution. We are also seeing for the budget to extend it through maybe March or February or March. But we're also seeing that Congress is tied down. They really want to move tax reform, which please track everybody, very important. And that is a priority. They want to get that done before the end of the year. That is highly ambitious, and so they are also trying to postpone the question on DACA, the DREAM Act, and comprehensive immigration reform, probably to February or March, and so they're gonna be tied together. A lot of us are expecting a government shutdown again, which would be terrible, but it's kind of a question of principles right now for both parties. And they're kind of on a standoff, and so for Democrats, they're not willing to throw under the bus the parents of a lot of dreamers, because the dreamers themselves have said that they don't want to take a deal that would help them but hurt their family. And so the Democratic Party is in this very tight spot in terms of not being able to politically accept any kind of compromise, really, and so is the Republican Party. And this is fundamentally the problem with comprehensive immigration reform. Bipartisan agreement, our immigration reform system needs fixing. They both agree on that. Everybody agrees on that. You rarely get, labor, chambers, trades, families, children's groups, health clinics, all agreeing on something. They do agree on this. It's been decades since we fixed our immigration system to keep up with our modern economy and our future. And so the question really is, how do we prioritize that? How do we build a system that is gonna create shared prosperity for everyone, that is realistic, that honors our family values, right? And so they haven't begun the conversation on that, which means they're gonna be stalled and in this fight for a long, long time. And so for us, it's more about priorities in terms of the things that are our values and how we are gonna advocate for those things in current conversations and try to move our leaders in DC forward on a path that gets us to a more pragmatic solution that actually works for us.
Thank you. That was a bit of crystal ball. And we have one final question from the audience. In the last year, at least 3 U.S. citizens have been swept up in ICE raids and transported to detention centers and informally deported because they lack documents. The question is, would charging the ICE agents and supervisors with kidnapping be a useful way to reduce excess enthusiasm? I don't know who would like to. Anybody would like to answer? So maybe as a follow-up to that question, one of the questions I had was about SB 54 and the negotiations that Governor Brown engaged in the last go-round, the versions that with the law enforcement departments, the sheriffs and the police departments. How supportive are they or accepting are they of the new version? Were the accommodations made in the final law satisfactory to the policing efforts of the local police and sheriff's departments? Do we know what their attitudes are?
It's kind of tricky. There's 2 things. The law is the law, and our law enforcement agencies are there to uphold the law. And that's what they do and try to do to their best. From the conversations we've had here locally with Police Chief Paul Roleri to even Alameda County Sheriff. However, there are some gaps in the law and some policies that still need to be both strengthened and or adhered to differently. And that brings you down to the political will of that leader, whether it's chief of police or if it's a sheriff. And the opinion of, well, I would say here in Alameda, we are very fortunate to already have on the books both as far as our ordinances and our internal police department policies, as far as the ACLU people power, 9 model policies for law enforcement agencies, what they should adhere to and have as far as policies that protect us and immigrants for what they do. 8 out of 9 of those policies were already on the books in Alameda. 1 was kind of soft. Actually, 2 were kind of soft. So 7 7 2/2 is what we had. But we were very confident in both the attitude of the administration of our government, as well as the people, in terms of what kind of culture, community, and values we supported as a city. And with that, the police chief very much reflects that. In the town hall we had with the police chief, to a word and to a question and to a person in the room, he reflects that and supports that. There was only one policy that he didn't differ with, but said if he had his druthers, he would like more flexibility as an authority in order to have the discretion to make a decision or make a call. And I can't remember what particular policy that was, but he didn't want to have his hands tied, literally, as he said, strictly with policy. He would like the ability to make that decision, and we respected that. But our policies here on the book are very solid here in the city of Alameda. In the county, however, we saw that there's some work to be done, and that comes down to whether or not the Sheriff Ahern, is listening to the electorate, and or is listening to the larger electorate, I think, and the sentiment here in Alameda County as to what protections we really do want to have on the books and in practice, here in Alameda County. And that attitude, I would say, his is different in terms of there's clear disagreement in terms of both his approach and policy that he does both support, all the way down to Urban Shield, and publicly how he states who is an immigrant and upon what grounds, as profiling them personally, and or in supporting the policies that he currently has. That does come down to a personal decision with that authority and with other sheriffs across. It will be a city by city and a county by county basis, and it will differ city by city and county by county. We're fortunate to have the chief that we currently have, and we're fortunate to have the ordinance that we do have. So it's good to be in Alameda right now and in supporting this.
Well, thank you very much. I think on that question we have one final comment. Thank you, Sarah. This will be our last question.
Yeah, I did just want to go back to the earlier question about ICE deporting citizens accidentally and see if I can tackle that. Deporting U.S. citizens is a no-no. They're not supposed to do that. You can't be deported if you're a citizen for any reason. But I think the question is really what can we do to perhaps stem any impulses towards excessive enforcement. And we can do that by really knowing what our rights are and by standing up for our fellow community members if we see their rights are possibly going to be infringed on. There was a very interesting video that was circulating a few weeks ago of ICE who came to a private home in Portland. Did anybody see this, where the painters were working in the house? And it was videotaped, which was a helpful tactic. And one of the painters, who was not the focus of the enforcement action, basically said, you don't have permission to come in. I've not given you permission to enter. I'm going to film this whole interaction. And they did end up taking this individual, but it was later, I think he was released later on. And we need to know what the law is, we need to know what our rights are, and we need to make sure that we enforce them for ourselves and for our community members.
Thank you, and there are materials at the back of the room for anybody who wants the famous cards, the red cards. I think our opportunity is to thank our panelists for really excellent presentations and thoughtful responses to our questions. and thank them very much for giving us that time and energy to educate us. Thank you all very much for coming, and especially for Trish Herrera Spencer, the mayor of Alameda, who heard all sorts of nice things about her police chief. So that was good. Thank you.